ADHDers and allies. Welcome to another episode of the ADHD and Me podcast with your host, me, ADHD girl. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing some of the sensory needs that can be common when you have ADHD. Joining me for this conversation, I talked to Julia, who has launched a fashion brand online, which is all about meeting sensory needs while still being practical and fashionable. Hi, Julia. How are you? And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be here?
Thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, it was definitely a journey of paths taking me down and really finding this kind of niche area. But I majored in fashion design and I was at the same time minoring in human development and business, not really knowing where it would lead, but knowing that I always loved working with kids. I loved fashion and I wanted to find a way to use fashion to have a positive impact. I didn't just want to be contributing to the waste that the fashion industry can contribute to and some negative sides of the fashion industry. Was navigating that and really fell upon volunteering at a local autism preschool near my college with my sorority. So it was actually educators and parents who brought up sensory challenges to me. And I was someone who wasn't very aware of them. You know about autism, you know about ADHD, but you're not aware of sensory in that way. And so that was really interesting to me. And I became really connected with a few local families that I became really close with, and their kids modeled for me. And it was really a process of learning how I could adapt my designs to accommodate their needs and like where we could take that and how clothing could have a positive impact on sensory rather than oftentimes a very negative impact on someone's day in the sensory realm. And yeah, so I graduated in 2020 right into the pandemic and ended up going to work in special education in autism classrooms to really get that hands-on educational experience, see how sensory was affecting kids in the classroom, and see how I could use fashion to help them before ultimately creating a sensory clothing brand.
Wow, that's just amazing. When you look at what you studied as your major and then even your minors, you can see how it's all really come together into this very, like you said, niche area, but a very needed area. And like you said, a lot of people don't get it, do they? They don't get the sensory needs unless you're on the ground and you're seeing it happen. So what were some of your experiences of seeing the sensory needs like as they happened when you were working in educational needs?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was kids who often looked like they weren't following directions, and it would really bother any adult. You're like, why aren't you listening to me? Especially when they're kids who typically do follow directions. You're like, hello, like you're supposed to be following what I'm saying, and you're in a structured setting. You're supposed to be listening to your adults. And it is frustrating when it's someone who usually does listen and you're like, what's going on with you? Like you always line up or you always listen and you're not. And I think me coming from that like background of the research I've been doing in sensory, realized a lot of times it was sensory related. There was once a girl was not lining up and I just noticed she was like pulling at her shirt, and I got closer and saw she was like pulling at the tag they put in the side of the shirt with all the information. I was like, I think that's why I don't even think she can hear what everyone's saying because she's so focused and dysregulated on the pain this tag is causing. So I ended up just cutting out the tag just to see. I just quietly walked over and cut it out for her, and she immediately lined up and answered all the directions. And that was one of my first experiences, I think, week working as a special education aide and para, they call them different things. And it just really solidified for me what I'd been learning, what educators had told me, what parents had told me, that little things like that can be so overwhelming and so disruptive to learning and listening and behavior. And there were so many other instances where loud noises cause meltdowns and to a more extreme degree. But that was just a very key moment for me, I think, in my journey of, okay, we need to be addressing sensory issues because people who don't get it, even in the educational space, who don't fully get that could have that big of an impact, but it really does. And that needs to be addressed for these kids.
Yeah. And this is such an interesting conversation for me on so many levels. Because one, I am clueless when it comes to fashion. I want to hear about what kind of goes into it and the dynamics of it and what kind of factors you consider. But also, it's only in the last few years that I've come to an awareness that I have sensory processing disorder. I didn't know it was this whole thing that was separate to ADHD. I thought, the older I get, I'm getting some autistic characteristics. What's with that? I've invested in some ear loops, so I use ear loops quite a lot now for noise. So yeah, it's been a whole journey for me. So yeah, I'm interested to hear about the fashion side of it and how that kind of crosses over with the educational side and everything, doesn't it? It's literally where it starts from. We always say, don't we, in education, like someone has to be comfortable. It's like one of the basic needs, isn't it? If you look at something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you look at, it's the physiological needs that need addressing first, that the most essential things. And a lot of that's to do with the sensory aspects.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's talked a lot about in education. The kids need to have a meal, they need to have slept, and those things affect learning. But it's so true that sensory needs and being comfortable and feeling safe and calm in your body is also a very key basic need that needs to be met before you can expect any sort of learning, any sort of communication, any of that.
Yeah, right. So, okay, so you realized there was obviously like a big kind of gap in the market for this, like it was like a niche area. Where did you go from there? Because I just think it's one thing, isn't it, to have this idea, I mean, especially as someone with ADHD, I love having ideas, but then it's bringing those ideas to life. Where did you start from?
Yeah, I think that was definitely almost a question I had for myself that I was hesitant about getting into it. You're like, okay, yeah, it's needed, but what do I know at 22 years old? How do you start a clothing brand? But a lot of it was really just starting basic. I think I just started reaching out to people who had expertise across the different areas, reaching out to influencers and professionals and parents, all with kids or personal experience with sensory or autism or ADHD, and then reaching out to entrepreneurs on LinkedIn or people in fashion, and just really tried to talk to everyone and get a sense of like where I needed to start and what I needed to do. And honestly, that's always like my best advice to everyone is just reach out. I think across all different disciplines, across different fields, anything you want to know, there's so many people that are willing to have a conversation and willing to help and share their expertise. And I think you always think, oh, it's going to be bothersome or why would they want to talk to me? But a lot of times people like are so willing to do it and it can be like really helpful for you, like getting off the ground, even if it's just a career pivot or, you know, looking to get a certain internship, like just getting advice from people, I think is key. And I think in starting a company when it feels so overwhelming is really essential. I definitely could not have done it without finding people who could answer some basic questions and do knowledge share and find community in that way. I found a lot of other young female entrepreneurs that we all got to get together once a week and talk through things. And that was just incredible. And I think that's really where it all begins is just that laying the foundation. Okay, what do I need to do to incorporate? What do I need to do to find a manufacturer? What does the manufacturer need? What's that whole process?
Lots of research needed.
Yeah. I think it was from 2020 is when I graduated and decided, okay, this needs to be a company. We didn't launch until April of 2022. So it was a lot of back end and like behind the scenes work for 2 years, really. And that was including like all the manufacturing time and all that. But with a new unique product, that also takes so much longer than you anticipate. You have to go through so many different sample rounds and teaching the factory and making adaptations and figuring out what's possible. So it was definitely a very long process, but there's definitely great community. So I think where anyone can start is just reaching out to people.
Yeah, that's such good advice, I think, in so many different areas, because I feel like in a society, we live in this kind of world where we're encouraged to compete with everybody. And we're encouraged, oh, this person obviously has this to do and they can't help me. But sometimes it is generally about reaching out because a lot of people are willing to help. But sometimes we get too in ourselves about reaching out, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it can feel almost intimidating or you don't even know what you would ask. But I think sometimes just starting out slow, building those connections. And then when you do have those burning questions, like you've started building a relationship with someone that has the expertise to help you. So yeah, I think you're right. Like not looking at it as competition or, oh, they're going to steal my idea. Like most people are out here just trying to do their one thing. It's so hard even doing one job or start one company that I definitely think that intimidation factor is more in your head than in reality.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes it's true, isn't it? The brain is our own worst enemy.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Do you like put a design on your clothing? Or do you specifically base it around sensory needs? and then add a design to it? Or does it all come together at once? Because honestly, it's just like rocket science to me.
No, it's such a fair question. I think it's a little bit back and forth. I usually start with kind of the idea around like a sensory need and then design into that and then build a garment around it that really works to make it fashionable. And it goes back and forth. Okay, this would be great for sensory needs. And you're like, but it doesn't really work to make it look fashionable, and go back and forth. But I pretty much started every design with, okay, this is a sensory need that's not being met, or this is a sensory tool that doesn't quite work. How can we adapt it so it's more convenient, more comfortable, and a part of clothing? And then it's how can we make it fashionable? And then there's that back and forth in the designing process. But those are the big idea order.
Yeah, all these different layers going in there. Yeah, I love it. So I'm going to go back to something you said earlier at the beginning when you were like, you knew you wanted to work in fashion, but you didn't want to go into the fashion with the way. So would you say sustainability is something that's really important to you, like in terms of when you're designing as well?
Yeah, I definitely think sustainability is something that has to be on everyone's mind nowadays across so many industries. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to always be thinking about. And I think there's so many layers to it that often aren't talked about a lot. I think in a lot of people's minds, it's, oh, the material's recycled, or, oh, it's whatever. And it has this very clear sustainability. But I think there's so many layers to that in the fashion industry. It's being socially sustainable so that all your workers and all the factory and the whole supply chain is like being paid, and that's not cheap either.
We don't dig deep enough, do we, when it comes to sustainability?
And just the idea that you could own one piece of clothing and that can solve a lot of needs. So rather than needing to own 20 hoodies, can you own one? And so I think in that way, I look at it as, let's make pieces that are high enough quality that can be a daily piece for someone to wear, while still trying to keep in mind making everything as affordable as possible while paying the workers and making sure everything's a good quality. But I think sustainability is a huge focus. And I think it's also one of the reasons I want to include so many different sensory tools into clothes, is you're not having to buy all these different things and have all these different products, and really have a more minimalized approach into what you're purchasing. So you can be a lot more mindful about what you're buying and look at sustainability in that way too.
Yeah, it's so important now, isn't it? And in terms of the sensory needs, we talked about it like from a very basic point of view, as in everyday sensory needs. But for people with ADHD and autism, emotional regulation is like a huge thing, isn't it? Emotional regulation is very much linked to sensory. I don't know if you've ever had a fly buzzing around and you just can't get rid of it. I always relate to that. Most normal people are aware there's a fly and it's annoying. But for people with ADHD and autism, they can't think about anything else because that fly's there, it's buzzing around, there's nothing else can happen.
That's such a good analogy. I love that one.
Is that because flies really annoy me?
Yes. And honestly, who do they not annoy? There's no person. I love when a fly like rams into my ear.
Gosh, yeah. So when you were building up your business and you're deciding which way to go, did you ever consider the idea of having a physical store, or were you very like aware it was all going to be online, or what kind of factors went into that decision?
Yeah, I definitely knew it was all going to be online, at least to start, largely because it was started during the pandemic. So it really didn't make a lot of sense anyway. But also just with the idea that people with autism and ADHD and sensory needs are all over and all scattered. There's really not one central location where it would really make sense to have a store and you would find them all and they could all go. So I think the idea that it was just more affordable and more sustainable as like a one person starting a business to do it online and just try to reach this fragmented market where everyone's all over the place, and having a central website where they could all go and shop and not necessarily have to travel to this one store location we were able to open. And I think that also keeping in mind that one day it would be amazing to have a store. And, you know, you had big dreams of having a whole sensory playground and then the like gift shops over here. And, you know, there's definitely dreams that make it cool. But definitely from a practical standpoint, online was definitely always the plan.
So I had a look at your website with your designs on there. I think there's some amazing concepts on there. I saw the hoodie. I thought that was such a great idea. which keeps out sound, and there's also a visual aspect to it as well.
The hoodie is definitely our bestseller and something that truly grew out of feedback from the community, what I saw with my students, because sound can just be so disruptive and so dysregulating. And oftentimes headphones are not very comfortable. They work really well for a lot of people, but I definitely had a lot of kids who were so sensory that they didn't like the feeling of the headphones. And that was a huge struggle because they didn't like the feeling of the headphones, but they didn't like the sound without the headphones on. And so it would really become this very frustrating experience for them where ultimately the headphones would just be chucked across the classroom and broken, which was not helpful for anyone and was really frustrating. So I really was trying to find a way to just help block the sound as much as could be done without it being a headphone, but have it be something that's more comfortable and also just more convenient. You don't always have the hands. You don't always remember to have the headphones with you on a walk and you don't anticipate a fire truck. Like it's not always like around and it's not always convenient when you don't have a lot of hands as a parent or a teacher. So really thinking about that, the hoodie really came to mind where it's just something they could pull up and down. And that definitely took a lot of planning and trying to figure out and reaching out to random soundproofing companies. And so much research went into that design that I'm so glad people love it. And it's our bestseller because it definitely took the most.
Yeah, I feel like your effort is paying off.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And you know what? It really does show like that kind of like example you gave and about some people not liking headphones because of the sensory, just goes to show how complex it is. Like even amongst individuals with autism or ADHD. I actually found out a thing recently, and this is going to sound hilarious. I actually found out this is something to do with sensory processing disorder. And it's something called the T-Rex arms. And I don't know if you've heard of it, because lately when I sleep, what I've been doing is I've been lying on my hands, like putting my hands right in and lying on and waking myself up because like my hand circulation, I'm cutting my circulation.
Right, like then they get all tingly.
And I'm Googling like, why am I lying on my hand? I must be some kind of idiot. Like, why am I? And then this whole thing came up about, apparently it's an emotional regulation thing. Right. I had no idea, which just goes to show how much there is to learn and how different everyone is. Because there are some people with ADHD and autism that don't have the sensory processing disorder. But for those who have it, it's so massive, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And as you said, it's different for everyone. And I think that is honestly the hardest part about having to start a company on like a small scale where it's just you starting a brand. There's so many different things that you need to address, and everyone has a different fabric preference and everyone has a different color preference and different tools and all these things. And I had to narrow it down and start with something. But it's so true. Like everyone is so different. That's also why I'm like, you could always return it, like give it a try. Like I know it's not going to work for everyone because everyone's needs are just so different within sensory processing, which I think is also something a lot of people don't know, is just how unique and individualized it is.
It really is. And I love that, how you offer that kind of, you can return it if it's not right for you. Because that must be really hard to do as like a small business as well, like the dynamics of it all and everything. But it means that you obviously care about whether something works for somebody.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I definitely think for any business, especially a small business, it would be so much easier to be like, sorry, no returns, because just can't handle that. But it's honestly just unfair to a consumer, especially in this sensory processing world where they're like, hey, what's the guarantee my kid will like this? Because I have no clue until they try it out for a little bit. And yeah, it's definitely way more about it working and being something that people enjoy and really and I find ways to still utilize the returns and make sure they're not wasted and can go as samples to clinics, or they never even really wore it. They just took it out and the kid was like, it's basically like new. It can be resold. So there's definitely ways to do it. It's a little more manual and hands-on. But yeah, I think it's so important for people to find what works for them. And that's going to be different for everyone.
You know what? And that's why I absolutely love the fact that you offer clothing for adults as well as children. Because again, that's like a bit of a niche, because a lot of people don't realize that adults can have sensory processing disorder. I think a lot of people tend to be familiar with the ear defenders, the headphones, because you see them a lot more now out and about in society. But the other aspects of it are not really the labels in the clothing and the material and things like that.
Yeah, I think oftentimes adults are dismissed in these conversations. And I think that's really hard. And it was something I was definitely really mindful of. I was working with toddlers and elementary kids, which is why we started it as children's clothing brand, because that's who I was working with and designing for. But always knowing that it wasn't something they were going to grow out of and people need as adults too. And I think honestly, that was the hardest to communicate to people before I was able to add in adult sizes, was like, I promise I know adults have it too. You know, I get messages or Instagram comments that are like, it doesn't stop at 18. And I'm like, no, I swear, I know.
Do you know what? That's such a common misconception, isn't it?
It is.
Because like you were saying, you were always aware that it doesn't stop with adults. But then the reason why there's not a lot known about sensory processing disorder in adults, because adults are expected to get on with it a bit more.
Yeah, they're expected to find ways to adapt them. Yeah, I feel like people expect at 18, they're like, okay, now you need to start figuring out how to adapt. Like, it's almost like people are willing to they're almost willing to cater to children more, like a little more like, oh, let me help you figure it out. And then as an adult, they're like, you're just going to need to figure it out. You're going to need to figure out how to adapt your life.
So it's like you get to 18 and you don't. Like I used to be a student warden at university, which was like in charge of halls. I was a student there myself, and you'd be surprised how many 18-year-olds came trying to microwave tinfoil, not realizing that it was actually a hazard. But this is what I mean. People assume that at 18, that's an adult. Actually, your brain is not sometimes fully functioning at that.
No, college freshmen, like they're not adults. Like I'll just be
look at myself, and I'm speaking from experience. I'm not just criticizing. I look at myself, 18, and I'm like, how did I possibly survive in the world?
You left us alone. We were expected to feed ourselves. Yeah, I definitely think that's a huge misconception, and I think it's definitely something that's nice to be able to fight about now that we're slowly able to add adult sizes too. Is really be able to communicate that and also make sure people know that the supports are not just going to stop. Oh, great. I found this hoodie that really works for my kid. But when he turns 18, he's suddenly going to not have it because it's not going to fit. So definitely it's been exciting being able to add adult sizes and be able to show on our website that advocacy for adults too.
Yeah, definitely. I'm guessing this is really popular because of the fact it's such a niche market. There's not many places or people who do this.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the key pieces of feedback, even before people shop. If they just find us on Instagram, they're like, thank you for thinking of this and thank you for trying to cater to it before they even try anything. Because I think there's so few people that are creating things like this and it is so unique. But the feedback that means the most is definitely from consumers that have tried the product and have tangible stories they reach out with. It's impactful that they're willing to send an email with their story. And I've gotten some that are like, oh, my son got to eat in the cafeteria with his friends for the first time because of your hoodie. And it was the day after it arrived. Like they tried it out that next day at school or anything like that. Is just honestly means so much because it's having such a tangible impact, which is the whole point. Like it's really helping these kids and adults in their day-to-day lives and in tasks and being able to increase that inclusion, which is really the goal, both in the classroom and out.
For some of these people, like children or adults, like something like this is life-changing. They've spent a lot of their life or not being able to participate in society normally because of their sensory needs. And something like this is actually helping them to do things for the first time. Like you said, someone who's sat with their friends for the first time in the cafeteria. That might be small to some people, but actually for that individual, it sounds like it was massive.
It's huge. Yeah, I think it's something that when I was in school, I'd just go to the cafeteria and eat. I did not even think about it. Sometimes it gets loud and you'll have a hard time having a conversation is probably the max that I ever thought about the cafeteria. But if it's something that you're excluded from or you can't handle, it really is such a big thing. And I think it's such a struggle socially then too. I think it's so hard to feel excluded or separate from your peers when you can't participate in certain things, even if that's a field trip, if that's going to the cafeteria, if that's playing on the playground during recess, whatever it is, even being in the classroom and not having to leave and do your work separately. I think it's things that a lot of people who don't have sensory, don't know about it, often take for granted, or you wouldn't even think of as a thing. Like you wouldn't think, where else would you eat but the cafeteria? Like it doesn't cross your mind.
It's not on their radar at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just think it's so amazing what you're doing because for some people you are changing lives.
It's definitely the goal.
Yeah, definitely. So where can people go? Your website. Do you want to tell us your website that people can look it up and see what's available and if it'll work for them?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Our website is sensoryclothes.com. And all of our social media is sensational_you. And sensational is like a play on words. It's SCNSE for your senses.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a little play on words, so a little trickier to find. But the logo is an orange sunflower. So that'll be your key giveaway. And I manage everything, our website, our social media. So any messages you send or emails you send, I'll be answering directly. And I love connecting with people and hearing feedback and hearing their stories and hearing what they want to see. So feel free to reach out anytime. I love it.
Fab. It feels like you've got a real good balance of the fashion aspect and the human element as well.
Yeah, it's definitely been a cool balance to find. I think in fashion school, there's a certain element of, oh, you need to create something that doesn't exist or you can't buy at a store. And then it was reining that back and being like, no, I want something that looks like you could buy it at a store. And it assimilates in and has this function. So it's been a cool back and forth with the human and fashion aspect.
Yeah. And Brittany, what do you think about this? I haven't researched it, but I'd be very interested in learning more about it. Do you think sensory needs can change over time, get worse or get better as you get older?
I definitely hope there's more research that comes out because I definitely think it's something that doesn't have enough research and it's just these anecdotal stories right now in a lot of cases. But I definitely think in general, it's something that can change over time, even day to day, even seeing in my students, if they didn't get a good night's sleep, if you feel a little sick, like oftentimes those sensory needs are heightened, even if it's the tag in your clothes is bothering you that day. But that just makes your tolerance for all other sensory lower. Yeah, I think it can definitely change, and I hope to see more research on it.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know what you were saying about tolerance? It really reminds me what like this wise man I know said, and I thought it was very poignant. And he said, every day you've got a different window of tolerance. He wasn't aiming this at me, per se, although at moments. But he said every day a person has a different amount of window of tolerance. Sometimes your window's wide open and you're like ready for anything. And some days your window is bolted shut. There's all the different factors that can affect like how much tolerance you have that day. And I thought that's a really good way of explaining emotional regulation to people sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's so hard to understand because you're like, oh, the grocery store didn't bother him yesterday or last week. So why would it bother him today? But his window may be shut today. Or I've heard people say his glass is full. Like you add anything else, it's going to spill over. And I think any metaphor like that where people can visualize it is so true because every day, every moment is not going to line up. And if something like a tag in their clothes that they're not calling out as the problem could be filling that cup or could be shutting that window. And I think then if there's a loud noise, if there's chaos, if there's a food that they don't really like or a new food, like that can tip it over the edge and you're not relating it back to all the sensory they've been trying to deal with, the tag in the shirt, their seams, the fabric. You think, oh, it's the food, but really it's just the culmination of everything.
So basically, when you think about it, you're like basically ensuring that people have a little more tolerance in their window.
Yeah, hopefully opening the window a little bit more.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such an interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This was so fun.
It's amazing to think that adapting such an everyday item like a piece of clothing can have such a big positive impact for those with sensory needs, both in terms of their learning and just being able to participate in society. It's definitely something that's not talked about enough, but hopefully by doing podcast episodes like this, we can spread more awareness. Join us next time on the ADHD and Me podcast, where we'll be talking about hypnotherapy as a potential treatment for ADHD from both a professional and personal perspective. Take care, ADHDers and allies, and thanks for listening.